Testing. Okay. I'll do that and then we'll start.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you everybody, and welcome to the panel, which is called The Next Frontier in Climate Infrastructure, the Need for Public and Private Capital in Emerging Markets and Developing Economies. I'm very happy to welcome some distinguished panelists here with us tonight. To my immediate left is Arnaud Uzubiaga, who's the head of impact for Proparco, and he served as a previously at the sustainability consultant, both independently and for the environmental resources management. And so he's going to be bringing to us ESG expertise on the side of the Development Finance Institution. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Next along is David Giordano. David Giordano is the head of climate infrastructure for BlackRock, based out of New York. And David manages $10 billion in 250 projects around the world. Thank you, David, for joining us. Next to David is Lena Osman, who is the regional head of sustainable finance at Standard Chartered Bank, which encompasses the regions of MENA, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. Thank you for joining us tonight. So I was just going to set the scene here, and then we're going to dive into questions. Emerging and developing economies are the most vulnerable to climate change, and many bear the burden of both the transition and adaptation. Moreover, population and consumption growth is set to double demand of these economies by 2050, and consequently also their carbon footprints. So we're at a crossroads between meeting this growth with fossil fuels and renewables, and we see the responsibility resting on wealthier nations to innovate. To date, unlocking capital at scale from both public and private sources remains a challenge. This session is going to focus on the need for blended public-private vehicles, the corresponding opportunity, and also the strategies to achieve the energy transition in the emerging markets. So first up, and Arnaud, I'm going to turn this to you. Why is public and private capital needed to support the energy transition?
Thanks. Both are needed, and we need all hands on deck and every dollar available. I think if you look at the need for energy transition or just to tackle the climate crisis, both on the mitigation and adaptation front, they are huge, and public money by itself is not enough. And so we need to leverage and mobilize private money, and that's one of the things we're trying to do as a development finance institution.
This is a real group effort here. We're going to have to cooperate. So, thank you very much, Anne, for the introduction and for kicking us off. Look, I think sitting here actually with two of our partners in the Climate Finance Partnership, I think it really demonstrates, that to mobilize capital, especially into emerging markets, it's really going to take an enormous amount of collaboration. And so when I think about what we did with our partners at Proparco and the German government in KfW, the Japanese government joining us and the foundations, and then the way that the commercial institutions were able to come in behind that catalytic tranche, and then to partner with Standard Chartered and be able to then really bring the power of multiple institutions across multiple areas of the capital structure is really a great example and a great innovation in terms of bringing capital and projects together in these markets that so desperately need to be catalyzed into the energy transition.
Yeah, I think you covered it. The only thing I would add is bringing in the public and the private money together will help will help bring scale to a lot of projects. There are some projects that the private sector, for example, will struggle to do without the support of the public sector, and therefore finding ways around how to scale financing to these projects by using the power of the public and private sector together is really important. And that's something that we're really focused on in terms of developing ideas around how you do that, because there are multiple instruments out there. Not all of these instruments are being used, and some of them are more appropriate to certain types of transactions in comparison to others. And this example is a great example of something that has been put in place to bring that power together to mobilize capital to where it matters most.
Great, and thank you for those comments. And obviously, mobilizing capital is really what we're trying to do here. It would be good, and Elnad, I'll turn to you, to talk about some of the unique challenges that you see in financing a just power transition, because obviously we all talk about being in the transition and making sure it happens, but how do we ensure that there's a just transition? So I'll get you to say some comments in relation to that.
Well, that's as if the energy transition was not big enough of a challenge. Now it has to be a just energy transition. Yeah, it's actually key both in OECD countries and non-OECD countries, and we do have a huge number of jobs relying on the current energy situation that we know is not sustainable, and the question of how we transition both the energy mix and all the workers working with it, towards a more sustainable one is key. I think the way we see it is that we try to focus on our efforts. And last year in Glasgow during COP26, it was a joint effort of the UK, France, Germany, the US, and the EU to focus on South Africa first. And they launched what is called the Just Energy Transition Package. So it's $8.5 billion, if I'm not wrong, dedicated to a just energy transition. France is providing $1 billion. It's massive at our scale. Most of it relies on AFD, our public mother company. The way they see it is a public loan to help on the public side, then a huge public loan, then a huge loan to the energy company, the local energy company, then some way to do some capacity building and help workers basically currently working in the coal industry to switch to more renewable jobs. And then also something that we often forget is all the transmission and distribution. So there's a component of it go towards all the transmission and distribution lines that will be needed for the transition as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is a lot of these projects which we want to do, which are transition projects, we will need to rely on data, and data is sometimes a very difficult, well, not sometimes, and a lot of times data is a really difficult thing to have in place, and therefore it makes it difficult to assess first of all a transition, let alone actually doing a just transition. But more importantly, how do we contribute to the green skilling of labor and ensuring that they are up to speed with the latest skills that are required for these new technologies. And that brings me to the third one, which is the new technologies. How much of those technologies are available to actually help us with a just transition? And to deploy a lot of these new ideas at scale, because we will need it at scale, and we will need that at scale because it will help us replace conventional energy, basically.
And maybe I would just add one last point, and it really came out of a discussion we had earlier in the week with the World Bank around this. And one of the key components, that they put up as part of their report for bringing capital to emerging markets, in the virtuous cycle, one of the key aspects to it is institutions. And so as we think about coming into some of these jurisdictions, I think working with and really to help bolster the sophistication of the institutions that are resident in those jurisdictions really will be a key component to effectuating a just energy transition, right? We need to both have the confidence as capital providers into the projects that those institutions have the musculature, have the skeletal structure to sort of maintain consistency. But then we also need those institutions to ensure that we have sort of the conduits and the pathways, if you will, that to then really implement a just transition, as was discussed earlier. So I think really thinking about that institutional component is also a big part of that puzzle.
Yeah, so now we've touched on this new vehicle that you mentioned in the opening, right? This climate finance partnership. I think it would be interesting to understand a little bit more about that, given that we've all partnered to create this vehicle. And I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of the gestation of it and how this came together, and everyone would have sort of a different part of this story, because I think at this conference we're all talking about lots of new things, right? And new things often start with ideas at conferences like this, and so I think it'd be interesting just for people to hear a little bit about how it came together and how this innovation was birthed, so to speak. And we can take different angles on it as well. It's interesting from different organizations' point of view. So David, do you want to start? Or Arnaud? I mean, everyone.
Yeah, I'll start because my version is probably the most boring. I was told to do it and get it done. It sort of makes it simple. But, I mean, to Anne's point, Anne eventually told me to do it and get it done. But it really started, as you say, during Climate Week in September of 2018, when our chairman and CEO stood on a stage with the French president, and they decided that we should all get this done. And then from there, we had the mandate to get it done. But it still took us another 2+ years of very detailed discussions. And then it really took, folks from the outside to come in and actually validate what we had been working on in the quote-unquote laboratory. And it took an enormous amount of trust. It took an enormous amount of hard work. And then ultimately, it really forced us to think and innovate in ways and utilize the tools that we had all grown up with in project finance and fund construction and fund management, and now apply it to a completely new regime, if you will, and figure out a way to do that in a way that was efficient, that was also fair to each of the parties, and for each of the parties to really take on the risks and the management of this product going forward, that played into their strengths. And so by developing this structure, we were able to come up with, each party to play their role, whether it be in the catalytic capital role, whether it be in the fund management role, whether it be in both the origination and the financing of the projects and the credit facility for, at the fund level. All these pieces that can create an efficient deployment of capital really required, a 2-year gestation period to come out. And, some any great project probably dies 6 or 7 deaths. I think this one, probably died at least 3 or 4, and we had a global pandemic right there in the middle of it, just to keep it interesting. So it really it takes a conviction, but it also, I think, ultimately it takes a mandate from the top as well.
It's funny because what you said were pretty much the first words of we have clearance in principle meetings where we discussed if we go or don't go on a project, and I think the president of the session started saying, well, on this meeting and this fund, the question is not are we going to do it or not, it's how are we getting it done. And and we're on the other end of the of the table, but it was an interesting journey, and I think the idea was simple, and I think when the big boss and the president agreed, the idea was simple. It was like, a lot of money needs to go towards emerging countries and towards the energy transition. You manage a lot of money. We know how to do projects there. Let's just bring it there. But the reality was that we don't speak the same language. We don't have the same tools. So it was an interesting journey to define a common tools, common language, and agree on a partnership. And now you have the challenge to making it work.
We all have that.
So my version of the story is more boring than yours. My version of the story is that it got handed over to me on a golden plate. So you guys went through the hard work, but my team, basically, my global team had worked on this. And I think the reason this was really interesting, I mean, all of us had an interest in it when it came about, because it was a very unique structure. It was something that we typically don't do. It's not like a day-to-day thing. So the amount of work that has gone into this, and I was a witness to some of that work, the amount of work that has gone into this was tremendous, to get people over the line, to identify why this is relevant to us as a bank, why we want to do this. And obviously sustainability and sustainable finance is a core pillar of our strategy. And therefore, this made sense for these reasons. And we feel that we have actually quite a lot to bring to the table in terms of providing financing to some of the projects as well on an asset level, to the fund, and thinking of ways on how you collaborate with the public sector, with other banks as well on these transactions, and that's why it really made sense. But it's one of those things that I'm very proud that we actually went ahead with.
If you don't mind, Anne, I might just add one thing, because I think that our partners here are also being a little bit modest from the standpoint of there are certain pieces to this IP that would have never happened, frankly, without Proparco's involvement, without KfW's involvement, and then ultimately, even Standard Chartered provided a lot of really good guidance here for us. We've developed, I think, in this product some of the leading edge environmental and social tools for tracking and measuring impact for this type of fund, and you take that a step further, and we also now have a committee that includes our limited partners to really track and hold us accountable to the targets that we've set on an investment by investment basis. And for me, what's so exciting about that is we were able to now bring in some real professional firepower to do this, dedicated specifically to this product. I think it sets a new model for how LPs and GPs can work together to really ensure that the impact tracking and reporting is tangible and auditable and is real and isn't just something that we sort of say from a qualitative standpoint, but that it's really quantitative. And I also really believe that our next global funds in any part of the world are going to be required to have this level of sophistication around these tools. And that, to me, is really exciting, because I think we're building a sustainable business that is going to really be a model for how this is done on a much bigger scale going forward.
You stole my next question, which was to talk about that, but that's okay. And I do think hearing about how things get done is important, right? Because everyone sort of issues the press release and the thing just appears. But the some of the thematics that I've heard through all of the panels and many of the ones we've participated in, but also listened to in the last few days, it genuinely takes some very substantial vision from the top where things are new and they're hard to get done. So you need someone to sort of thump the table and say it's going to get done. And then partnerships to form, and they're messy, right? They're messy, they're not straightforward, and people are working things out as they go along. And it's probably not always the finished product that starts, but then you sort of get going. And that's one of the thematics. You have to get going. These things are hard and they're not going to get any easier, right? So in terms of the partnership, and David, you touched on this, the kind of the best practices and melding together what all of the different parties bring to the table, I think is actually fascinating here, right? Because we created not only a fund structure, but then a new way of operating and a new way of creating best practices in terms of the data, the analytics, and also the reporting and best practices sharing. I wonder if we could just talk about that a little bit in terms of how it works on a regular basis and what we're starting to see, because it is new, it is very advanced, and I just love to just drill down on that kind of as an almost final question before we do a rapid fire round. So who wants to take that in terms of just how it works?
I'll take it. Yeah, well, I think I guess we can talk about the environmental and social risk management for the fund. And so we talked about the just transition, but there's another layer as well. Is that we want to transition for the energy sector. We want it to be just, and we don't want it to have adverse environmental impacts. And it's pretty important these days with the biodiversity conference happening, COP15 in Montreal in 4 weeks. And we have now it's clear that we're not going to solve the climate crisis if we have detrimental impacts on biodiversity and vice versa. And I remember when we started, one of the of the bad moments in the first days of the project was when we sent our traditional environmental and social questionnaire that we typically send to fund managers, and it has one question about environmental and social impacts of the project and how they are managed, and the answer was our projects, our green projects, they don't have any environmental impact. And I was like, okay, we need to step back and start talking about the fact that, well, you can do a renewable project, but if it's located on a river that has endangered species, you will need a huge amount just of baseline work to understand what are the conditions. It will take another huge amount of work to work with the engineering team to embed mitigation measures, and then it will take an even much more work on the monitoring and when the project is live to ensure that you're not impacting biodiversity. And if you do this in emerging markets, you do this in a context where there's not much baseline data available compared to countries where you had more experience to work in. You do it in countries where the environmental law is a bit weaker than in countries you had experience to work on, and you do it in countries where law enforcement and environmental law enforcement is also weaker. So yeah, the part of the challenge was to ensure that the project embed this risk component on its due diligence process, and I'll pass you the details, but basically we ensure that when opportunities come in the pipeline, they're reviewed thoroughly from an environmental and social point of view.
And I think that story really demonstrates too, and I think the partnership started to switch gears, right? Where it stopped being sort of a little bit of sandpaper chafing against each other, and where we realized, okay, if we're going to do this, we all have to sort of get on the same side of the table and start engineering how to do it, because we need to look at this through a lens that is very different than how you would normally look at it from a purely commercial lens. And then that's when I really feel like it started to take off. The light bulb went off on our side of the table. I think that's when our partners realized we were actually well intended. We just didn't necessarily have the vocabulary or the experience to do it. And so then we really, I think, developed something that now, again, I really believe is going to be one of the most important pieces of intellectual property to come out of this, because not only do we have a process that starts from the moment an opportunity presents itself on our pipeline until we make the investment, but then also the ongoing management of that investment. Not only do we have something that I have a high degree of confidence that it will be, as complete as we can in the jurisdictions that we operate, but I also believe that it's going to allow us to make better investments, right? That we're going to actually now have a better performing fund because of the rigor that we've put in place there. And I'm just, super excited as we're coming, up on our, deploying our first capital into our first opportunities this year. I think it's going to be really, really cool to see how that now plays itself out and watch how that sort of changes the way we think about these projects and the way we think about the whole broader portfolio, and to have brought our partners along kind of through the diligence process. I think it'll just make for a much more dynamic and engaging experience for both the limited partners and us as the general partners. So, a really exciting piece of the overall opportunity.
I think you pretty much covered it. I mean, having had a look at the details of the ESMS and what it takes, and specifically the actual continuous engagement. So it's not just at the investment part of the of the project. It's also how you manage the project going forward, what it takes, the detail that has gone into that. I think has been tremendous, and I really like that part of it, because our industry is one that's continuously evolving. There are continuously new ways or more efficient ways of doing things, and I think that's going to help a lot, post actually investment and post closing. I just wanted to add something really interesting that actually came out of this, and this goes to your point about how that one thing has kind of, or would lead to other things, other good things, other ideas. One of the things that has come out of this for us specifically is that we have created an impact label for financing some of these funds. And the reason this is necessary is, if I just kind of give you a little bit of a background, when you finance green, social, sustainable projects, there's usually a framework that you have in place, and that framework has a second-party opinion on it, basically to say these are the projects that we will label as green or social, and we will deploy our capital towards. Now, with a fund structure, it's more difficult because you don't know what the assets are when the fund closes, for example. So one of the ideas that we have actually contemplated on the back of that is there are a lot of funds out there, for example, that are doing impactful things. I mean, in this specific case, it's more it's quite clear from the direction of travel, the renewable energy, the type of investments that we will deploy into. But then the thought process was that, okay, there is a procedure, there is a process that we can go through to assess how funds are looking at their investments, how they are going. So, for example, looking at the ESMS, looking at the process, at the what goes into the investment process, what goes into managing the assets afterwards. This is something that we have started looking at, and we are starting to hopefully look to deploy as well as a new product into the market, and hopefully that will lead to more financing, more ideas as well that we could bring along. But yeah, just to go back to your point, I thought that was a good one.
Okay, so that's great. Ideas lead to more ideas, and we love to hear that. So we're going to do a quick fire round now. I'm going to ask you the one big idea, big thing that maybe's been sparked by this week, or that you had in your head about how to improve the climate. Just a big idea. What? And we'll just go down the line.
Well, I wouldn't call it a fire round then. It's like, 'cause I think the big idea, we see many solutions, and everyone talks about solutions, but we should not lose sight of the problem, which is, stop the fire, keep carbon in the ground, both coal, oil, gas, and leave forests where they are, and grow them if possible.
I think the big thing is that it's that it's don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, and start getting some things done. And I think the energy that I've felt here this week is that this feels like a time of implementation and not a time of sort of contemplation or defining, but a time of doing. And that to me is really exciting.
I'm going to cheat and do two big things. The first one is I now have a new favorite SDG, which is SDG 17, which is partnerships, and I really feel. I mean, it's actually quite great that we are here talking about our partnership together. But partnerships, I mean, the amount of discussions that have been happening over the last couple of days has been incredible. The things that have come out of it as well, it is partnerships. It is people coming together, working together for the same objective. And the second one that I would talk about is I'd really love to see how much more we can do from a carbon credits market perspective, and how we can get involved through partnerships to do more in that space, and how we can do it in a way that has the integrity, has the right standards, and is of high standard type of market as well. But yeah, two things from my side.
We need one from you, Anne.
Well, I actually love that you know the SDG is 17. So it's like I love that. I'm not quoting SDGs, but I'm going to get into that. You know, look, okay, my one is actually, I think, is a mix of all of these, which is really what's come out of this week, which is just start getting stuff done and talk more to everyone who's out there. I mean, I think the number of ideas that I've had this week, from going to random panels that I've walked past and just listened to. I mean, we're only at the start of all of this. And I think the public-private partnership is really important, right? And this happens to be a great example of that. And so, you know, again, thank you to all my panelists for this fantastic discussion. Obviously, the gap is big for the developing markets. We know that. We've put some drops in this ocean with this group. But I think the public-private partnership and working with each other and taking the best of each other's brain power and creating a new thing is what we want to do more of. So thank you to the panelists. It was great. And hopefully everyone will reach out more and find more partnerships. So thank you very much. Appreciate everyone joining us here tonight. Thank you.